Hello, everybody. This is a re-recording of the lectures from Thursday, October 15th. The original recordings in class did not work, so I am re-recording these on my computer. These will be a very shortened version of the lecture, just because we had a lot of discussion in class and various things, so I'm just going to be pretty straight to the point. And what I'm going to be doing in today's recording is finishing up the protein chapter, which is really just this one slide on vegetarian diets, and then going through the alcohol chapter, chapter 8. So let me get started here. So we ended talking about protein allergies, and we had a fair amount of discussion in vegetarian diets in class, like the pros and cons, why people do it. And we know there are different types of vegetarian diets or vegetarianism. We have vegan, which really only eat food from plants. So there's no milk, there's no or dairy, there's no eggs, there's no meat of any kind. Okay. There is also what we call lacto, meaning milk, ovo, meaning bird or egg, and vegetarians. So in other words, they eat milk and cheese, or excuse me, milk and eggs, but not meat or fish. Okay. And then we also have lacto-vegetarians that eat milk but not eggs, meat, or fish. And there's other versions of being a vegetarian, but it's not, a vegetarian is not the same thing all the time. Okay, it's different depending on the limits people have instilled. What are the concerns? There are some concerns about eating a vegetarian diet, okay, and that is specific intake of certain nutrients. So if you're a vegetarian, getting things like B12, protein, iron should be up here as well. You can write iron in, vitamin D, various things are a little trickier to get on a vegetarian diet. Okay, you can get them, but you have to make sure you're eating specific food groups that are enriched in these, because many of these things are, it's easier to get. For example, protein with a good biological value is much easier to get eating meat. There are also some special concerns for infants or children due to their needs. So, for example, kids have a very high need of vitamin D, and eating a just sole plant-based diet, there are challenges to make sure that these infants get enough. Okay. Now, with all that said, there is no doubt that eating a vegetarian diet has many benefits, and if you look in all the research and everything else, vegetarian diets are, as far as health goes, superior to just about any other type of diet. Okay, the more vegetables, the more fruits you eat, the more plant-based material is beneficial for you, whether it's cancer, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, you name it. Okay, so that's not to say that you have to be a vegetarian to live a healthy life. Clearly, having some animal products in there is, is workable, is doable. But it's just saying that when given a choice, erring more on the plant-based side is probably more beneficial for you than than consuming more meat or animal-based products. Okay, so that finishes chapter 7. Let's go on to chapter 8. So chapter 8 is the alcohol chapter, okay? And this one, again, there's not that many slides, so I'm going to be pretty brief on this. So most of what we've talked so far about getting energy from food was from carbohydrates, from lipids, and proteins. And those are 4, 9, and 4, respectively. What alcohol is we get about, it's kind of more intermediate. We actually get 7 calories per gram. So it's not as much as fat, but it's more than carbs and proteins. And alcohol, of course, we get from a variety of sources, beer, wine, hard liquors, etc. And all of these are really generated from fermentation. Okay, so we take some sort of fruit or vegetable like grapes or potato or corn, whatever it may be, that has starch in it. Okay, then we ferment that starch with bacteria, and that bacteria take that starch, and one of the products that of this fermentation process is alcohol. They produce other things too, but that alcohol is then what's used to make these different drinks. Okay, and these vary quite a lot in both the alcohol content and the calorie content of drinks. Some much sweeter than others, some much more alcoholic than others. And you can see what the standard drink is down here, which is kind of deceiving because in today's society, you go to a place to have a beer, very rarely is it actually 12 ounce. It's usually a 16 ounce or 20 ounce or even more. So going back to the production thing, again, we have this fermentation where I think I said bacteria, I meant yeast. Yeast ferment the carbohydrates, the starches usually, to alcohol and gas, carbon dioxide. And then once this fermentation process is done, we distill it, which means we basically extract or pull apart the alcohol from the rest of the product. So we get rid of all the other stuff. So when it comes to metabolism of alcohol, okay, this is a really important aspect of alcohol. So alcohol comes in the body. So first of all, it is extremely efficiently absorbed, okay? And the rate at which you absorb it is kind of dependent on how much food you have in you. So if you drink an alcoholic drink on an empty stomach, it's going to be absorbed very fast. If you have a full stomach where there's lots of other food, various things in there, that'll slow down the absorption of alcohol, okay? But in either case, we absorb close to 100% of it. None of it usually escapes, okay? Once it's absorbed, the alcohol preferentially goes to the liver. So we talked about nutrients mostly leaving the gut, going to the portal vein, and then the liver sees almost every nutrient except lipids as the first organ. Okay, so that's the first organ that gets first shot at everything. And the liver takes alcohol out of the blood very efficiently. So probably 90-95% of the alcohol you consume doesn't make it past the liver. Okay, so the liver extracts most of it. Now, once in the liver, alcohol is converted to this metabolite called acetaldehyde. And I'll talk about this in a minute, but this is the toxic part of alcohol, okay? What acetaldehyde does is it runs around the cells and does damage to proteins and DNA and all sorts of things. And long-term high consumption of alcohol, we know it does many bad things, and those are thought largely to be mediated from acetaldehyde, okay? Now, the acetaldehyde can then be converted to acetyl-CoA, and this is an important molecule, and you're going to hear more about this in the metabolism chapter, because this is where, when you break down carbs, you break down proteins, you break down fats, they all can get broken down to this. So this is kind of a branch point, or a funnel, so to speak. Everything kind of funnels down to this. And what can happen to this acetyl-CoA then is that it can go to be used for energy, or if you have too much of it, more than you need for energy, we use acetyl-CoA to make fat. And one of the things we know about alcoholics, for example, is they get fatty liver. And I'll show you this in a minute. But that is partly due because there's so much alcohol coming in here, more than we could ever need for energy, that all these carbons eventually end up in fat, and that fat gets stuck in the liver, and it causes damage, and especially over long term. So when it comes to metabolism, I mentioned the acetaldehyde being toxic, but there's really two pathways I want to focus on. This last pathway, if I can find a pen here, I'm just going to cross it out. Whoops, I'm a little crazy with my pen here, okay? Don't worry about that one. What I want you to focus on in these first two. And the first pathway is if you don't drink much, this is what is always there and will metabolize, like if you have a drink, this is what's going to metabolize it. It's primarily in the liver, and when you have low to moderate intake, this is the pathway that is responsible for detoxifying and getting rid of that alcohol. Now there's another pathway called the microsomal ethanol oxidizing system, or MEOS. This is also in the liver, but this is one that is induced. So in other words, when you drink a lot of alcohol frequently, it upregulates this pathway, okay? And this pathway takes over in your alcohol metabolism. Now, it kind of acts as like the first pathway can't handle it all, so this one kicks in. It's like a backup system. The problem is with this system, you often get more of that acetaldehyde, which again is that toxic kind of poisonous thing. And so this may actually make the matters worse when you're consuming too much alcohol over a long period of time. So what affects metabolism? Ethnicity. So we know, if I go back to this slide and we look at a few of these enzymes, alcohol dehydrogenase, aldehyde dehydrogenase, there are differences in these enzymes. So the DNA that encodes these are different, and these enzymes have different efficiencies to which they work. And we know, for example, in Asian populations that some of these enzymes don't work very well, and that's why certain people from Asian descent can't handle alcohol. They get their flushing face, the red face, or they get drunk really fast, or feel hot flashes. That's because they can't metabolize the alcohol as effectively as Caucasian or African American can. Gender is also one. So women have more fat in their body than men and less water. So when you drink alcohol, the water is distributed in a smaller, or excuse me, the alcohol is distributed in a smaller pool of water. Therefore, it makes it more concentrated. So that's part of the reason women generally get drunk faster than a male will. Also, women typically weigh less, which is also another factor. And then age. As you age, it actually slows down your metabolism. Okay? The other thing that can happen is we can build what we call tolerance. So if you gradually increase your alcohol intake, it will, again, in part through the pathways I talked about, induce those pathways to be able to handle metabolizing the alcohol. And many of these effects are due to these enzymes, which I talked about a couple slides previously, that are really critical in converting alcohol to acetaldehyde and acetaldehyde to acetyl-CoA. On average, we metabolize about a half a drink an hour. Okay, so if you have a drink, it takes about 2 hours to clear that from your body. And if you drink at a faster rate than that, that's when your blood alcohol will rise and you will actually become intoxicated or drunk. So signs or symptoms of alcohol poisoning, I'm not going to spend much time on these. These are hopefully pretty obvious, and I imagine some of you have experienced these, if not for sure seen them. But some things that we don't often, we recognize the confusion and stupor and, lack of balance and things like this. But there's also some pretty severe biological things going on. For example, you can become hypoglycemic, hypothermia, unconsciousness, seizures, all sorts of things that can be very deadly, actually. So in the U.S., most people do consume alcohol, and about 1 in 20 of us are actually alcohol dependent, and that's about double for essentially your guys' demographic. So college age is kind of the peak of alcohol consumption in the U.S. and in many places. Okay, and if you look worldwide, you can see where's the U.S. U.S. is down towards the middle, below the middle actually. And so we don't drink nearly as much as some other places, but we also drink a lot more than other places as well. So binge drinking is defined as, I can't remember the exact number of drinks, but it's a lot of drinks in a very short period of time. I think it's like 4 drinks in 2 hours or something like this. And this is a very common thing, as many of you know, that happens in college students. Okay, less and less of this occurs as you age or with adulthood. But for you guys, it's pretty common. And the consequences of this binge drinking or getting drunk are pretty severe, actually. I mean, due to deaths, injuries, a lot of sexual assaults, alcohol plays a role in, so it impairs judgment. It can get to the point where there's academic difficulties. I've seen this firsthand. And so why is this such a problem in college? And these things are very serious, and I don't take these as a laughing matter, but we have entire sports in college now, like beer pong. We have other events that encourage massive alcohol consumption, such as the bong. And a big thing is the marketing. It's the culture, okay? Anytime you open up the Daily or whatever it may be, there's constantly beer specials, 2-for-1s, whatever it may be. And that's the market. You guys are the demographic that is known to drink, and so they're going to advertise towards you. So what are some of the consequences of this? Alcohol, as we talked about, is metabolized primarily in the liver, but it can affect a lot of different organs and systems. The big one, as you can see down here, is the liver. So you get fatty liver, and eventually this can lead to what we call cirrhosis of the liver. So the liver becomes basically dysfunctional and it can die, and you need a liver transplant if you want to stay alive. You do not want this. Many other things, it affects the brain, heart, and many types of cancer, and I think I show you that on the next slide here. Yeah, just give you some ideas of what's going on. There's cancer up here, number 3 of the throat, larynx, esophagus. We have breast cancer risk. We have cancer of the colon, rectum. So there's multiple ones that play a role. Number 7 here is fatty liver, okay, which is very important. And we have malabsorption of nutrients, which is another one that you can see if you consume this very long term. So there's lots of different negative consequences of consuming too much alcohol. Some of these in more detailed are protein energy malnutrition. So when you get alcohol, you get calories, but you don't really get protein from those calories, right? And in some cases, when you're consuming alcohol, the rest of your diet isn't too good. So your balance of energy and protein can be kind of off, so to speak. There's also some issues with vitamins, so water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins. And these are due to, for example, the water-soluble vitamins, there's decreased absorption of these due to the alcohol, but there might also be increased requirements because your body, when you drink a lot, it's trying to repair itself all the time, and some of these are very important in that type of process. Okay? And then fat-soluble vitamins are actually stored in your liver, and so when your liver becomes fat, it can actually screw up the storage of A, D, and K, these fat-soluble vitamins. There's also mineral deficiencies, and this is probably due to, again, probably more decreased absorption. One thing that we should talk about is the alcohol consumption during pregnancy and breastfeeding. So this is a big concern because alcohol has very detrimental effects on babies, whether they're still in utero or newly born. And one of the problems with this is that the most critical window for babies is that very first few weeks is when their central nervous system develops, so about the first 3 or 4 months. And this is also the time when sometimes women don't know they're pregnant. So you go out and party, something happens, you get pregnant, and then you continue to do that. Maybe you miss your period, or it's late, or you're irregular, or whatever it is, and you don't realize you're pregnant until maybe 2, 3, 4 months in. Well, by that point, the nervous system is partially developed, and if you've been consuming a lot of alcohol in that period, it can have very severe consequences on that baby's development. Okay, and if this is too severe, it becomes what we call fetal alcohol syndrome. So there's mental retardation, there's impaired growth, lots of different things that it's a very poor quality of life for that baby. We also get fetal alcohol effects that are less severe from these. It's basically a kind of a spectrum. And then the other point I want to make is the breastfeeding. So alcohol, if you are breastfeeding, alcohol is transferred into the breast milk. So if you are breastfeeding, you do not want to be consuming alcoholic beverages. So when it comes to alcohol abuse and alcoholism, the alcohol abuse signs, so alcohol abuse is consuming too much alcohol, essentially chronically. These are pretty straightforward. People are either drunk or whatever, and they don't fulfill their responsibilities. They drink when they shouldn't, so having drinks for breakfast, at work, and you can have related social issues, legal issues, all sorts of things. Alcoholism is really you have to have the alcohol. If you don't, you go into withdrawal, you have cravings, you lose control, and it's pretty severe. And what's really astonishing, actually, is that a third of all Americans fall into one of these categories at some time in their life, which is a really, really scary statistic. So what affects the risk factors for alcoholism? Genetics. So we know there are certain populations or genes that increase your risk for getting it. So in other words, if your parents are alcoholics or grandparents, your risks are higher, so be aware. Males are much more likely to develop alcoholism. Now, it's not clear if this is a genetic thing or if it's a hormonal thing or what it may be, but maybe both. This one's a little bit tricky. The age of drinking onset. Typically, the earlier you start drinking, the more likely you to become an alcoholic. But I could also argue that in certain societies where drinking is more part of the lifestyle, like moderate drinking is part of the lifestyle. You know, if you go to Europe or certain places where you're 15 and you have a glass of wine with your dinner, is that kid going to be more likely to develop alcoholism? I don't think so, but it depends on the circumstance, I guess. Ethnicity, so we know that Native Americans, and this may be in part genetic, but probably sociocultural aspects as well contribute to alcoholism. And mental health. If people are depressed, that is a big driving factor to cause alcoholism. So the big issue with treating someone with this is to actually get them to recognize they have a problem. Most people just say, "Oh, I don't have a problem. It's not a big deal." And then it gets worse and worse, and then by the time you have to intervene, they're too far gone down that path. So typically what's done is there's behavioral therapy or medications, okay? There's also really good support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, and those have been really effective as put people in the same setting that have the same challenges, social issues like this, and they can, as a group, help them overcome this type of thing. So the one thing we've talked mostly about alcohol being bad or too much alcohol, but actually moderate drinking. Okay, so for a female, maybe a glass of something per day, or one drink per day. For a man, 1 to 2. It's actually shown to be beneficial. Okay, from a lot of different standpoints, a lot of different health-related standpoints. Now, keep that in mind. I mean, if you're pregnant, you're a baby, whatever it may be, you should not be doing these. But we do know that lots of studies have shown benefits, and this graph shows here. This is deaths, essentially a death rate, and this is all-cause mortality. So in other words, all deaths from every source, and then particular cardiovascular deaths. What you see is that starting out over here with no drinks to less than a drink a day to 1 drink per day, and then 2 and up, we see is it's kind of a little bit of a flat U. So in other words, at moderate alcohol intake, okay, 1 drink, maybe 2, less than 1, these are all dipped down, meaning there's less rates of death, less rates of cardiovascular disease. But as you drink more, they go up, and if you don't drink any at all, they actually go up. And the reason this is because many types of alcoholic beverages contain polyphenols. Okay, so we talked about phytochemicals earlier in the semester, all these compounds in plants that are good for us. They're not technically nutrients, but they're good for us. And one class of these phytochemicals is called polyphenols, and they act as antioxidants. So they're actually very protective to our body. And these are especially abundant in red wines and beer. But there may also be some direct benefits of the alcohol itself, too. And that concludes the alcohol chapter. That was a very quick version of it. And so that's where we ended on Thursday, and that's it.